Hello, we are in the quick start page, and this page provides an introduction to about 80% of the React concepts. So let's dive into each one of these topics to learn more about React. We are going to see how to create and nest components. We are going to also learn how to add markup and styles. We are going to learn how to display data. We are going to learn how to render with conditions and also lists, and how to respond to events and update the screen, and how to share data between components. So it's a lot of topics here, but let's do it. First, creating and nesting components. So React components are basically like JavaScript functions. So we can have like a button like this in a function, and then you return the JSX that we learned already in previous videos. That is like a very nice way for you to write create element calls. So, okay, we have this first create element call here, that is a button. And then you can use your component inside another component like this one. So this component is called my app, and you can use your component here. As you can see, your custom components, they start with a capital letter, in this case M. And the HTML components, they start with lowercase. It's important that you start your React component with uppercase, otherwise React is not going to identify as your component. It's going to be confused by like HTML tags. So it's really important that your components need to be uppercase, the first letter. So we have this sandbox here with the same code that we see above. So I recommend you to pause the video now and you try out a few things. Maybe if you'd say, oh, but that's very simple, it's good to try. Like maybe you can convert this to a play button. Okay, now it's a play button. And you can play around a little bit. Maybe you can create another component. Maybe you can create like my button tool, that is my play tool, and I can also put here. So you can get familiar with this idea of components and nesting components. So that's really helpful for you to play around because you know, right? To learn how to code, you need to code. There is no other way. One thing to notice here is that you have like a export default. So this is a way that a few frameworks, it's not React that is requiring this, but a few frameworks, they expect that each file exports at least one default component. To be honest, I don't like this approach because I think like exporting using default is like to use an anonymous function because anyone can import with any name. But a few frameworks, they require you to use export default. So if you're using these frameworks, you should take care of this part and you should pay attention to use default when they require that. But usually if I'm just importing components on my own application, I don't use export default. I always use like the export with a very specific name. So I know for sure that this name is going to be used across all my app. So as you saw above, we are using JSX. So for JSX, we have a few rules. JSX is more strict than HTML. So for example, if you use a tag BR on HTML, you don't need to close the tag BR, but for JSX, you need to close the tag BR as well. And another thing that is really important is that you can't return multiple tags from a single component. Like you can return like multiple tags in the first level. What you need to do, you need to wrap this tag or with a div or with a span, whatever you want. But usually, if you don't need to have a tag wrapping it, you can wrap just with these empty tags. It seems a little bit weird. Actually, it's not empty. This is just like a way to write it in a short form. It's called fragment, but you can just put this and that's not going to be anything in your final HTML. So you can just wrap components like this and that's it. That's going to work. In your final markup, you're going to have just the H1 and the P tag. You're not going to have this tag here because this tag is empty. But if you need to have a key, so you need to use fragment instead of just the empty tags. But we are going to see this later, so don't worry, we are going to talk about that again. The important rule here for you to remember is that you can't return multiple tags in the first level. You need to wrap in a single tag. If you are migrating a big project to JSX, from HTML to JSX, you can use also this converter, so you can convert your HTML code to JSX. Almost everything is going to be the same, but a few things like the class here is going to be class name. So it could be helpful to use a tool like this. For example, the comments is also a little bit different. You also need to wrap because here we have like 2 elements. So you need to wrap in another tag. So these tools can be helpful, but usually you don't do this all the time. You just do this if you are migrating a project from HTML to React. I just mentioned that a few attributes are going to be different in React, and actually React calls these props. So the prop class name in React, it means exactly the same as the attribute class in HTML, but you need to use class name. That's just because it was going to cause an error because class is a reserved word in JavaScript, but doesn't matter. Right now, you just need to learn that you need to use class name instead of class to set CSS classes. So you can set your CSS class as usual, but you need to use class name instead of class, and then you define your CSS also as usual. Like React doesn't help you in any way with CSS, but you have, of course, a lot of libraries and frameworks that can provide a lot of utilities for you to use with CSS and also with React. But React doesn't do anything special about this. You can just use the technique that you prefer. This is one part that I really love about React, that you can display data. Basically, you can display anything that comes from the JavaScript side in your markup. So you can mix like the JavaScript logic with your markup, and that's really, really powerful. So what you need to do, you just need to use curly braces here, like this part of the code, and you can kind of interpolate like the markup and also JavaScript code. Of course, you're going to learn along the way that you have a few rules on how to use the code inside these braces, but it's really, really powerful. And you can use these braces like to be the children of a tag, but you can also use as a property value. So you can get like the source from the image, and you can provide a JavaScript variable here, and that's going to work as well. And as I said before, you can put like very complex expressions here. Let's see one simple one in this example together. So you can concatenate strings like, okay, this alt for this image is going to be photo of and the username. So you can do all the JavaScript statements inside tags, and you don't need to have in a very distant place in your code the way to format like the string, and in another way the way to present the string. So you can just mix like the markup and also JavaScript code, and that's really helpful. Here you can also see a way to provide a full object for a property. So you have like the double braces here, but just because one brace is from the property and then the other brace is from the object itself. I'm a big fan of React, so sorry if I'm saying like all the time, oh, this is really cool, this is really powerful, but also this is something that I like a lot about React, because you can do conditional rendering, and especially if you understand well conditions in JavaScript, this is really powerful because JavaScript, it returns the part of the condition that it finishes the evaluation. So we are going to see later other ways that you can return, but this way is a very naive way to do it, but you can also do it. Like you can declare the variable, and then you can have the if and else to decide what goes inside this variable. But like I don't use if else very often, because I think when I have else, my code is doing like more than one thing, and we should avoid that. But anyway, we are going to learn other ways to do this later. But here the important part is that you can change the content that you are rendering just doing simple JavaScript. Can you see? We don't have anything special here about React. It's just JavaScript. You're just doing a condition with JavaScript code, and then in the end, we just return the content. And you can also use other JavaScript tools like conditional operator. So you can use the ternary operator, so you can check inside the braces. Can you see here? So it's JavaScript code. All the time that you see these braces is because you're going to use JavaScript code in the markup file. So we are going to have this condition. If this is true, we are going to return the admin panel. If this is false, we are going to return the login form. So very simple JavaScript code, but inside the markup. So that's really helpful. And last but not least, the part that I said that if you understand how logical conditions work in JavaScript, you know that if this is going to return true and this is an end, so it's going to evaluate this part and it's going to return the last part that was evaluated. if it was or, it was going to evaluate, and this is going to be true, and it was going to return true. So when you start to learn the way that JavaScript works, and you learn how you can use conditions with React, you can have like very short code like this. So you can just put a condition here, and if this condition is true, we are going to render the component here. That's not a special feature of React. It's just how JavaScript evaluate conditions, and React markup take advantage of that, and it's going to have a very nice and clean way to write code. But that's not because of React. That's just because the way conditions work in JavaScript. Talking about JavaScript, we also have ways to iterate in JavaScript, or to do a for loop or the array map, and you can also do this with React inside our markup. So let's see how it works. Here we have a product list, okay, a very simple object just with a title and an ID. And you can map. Map, if you are not familiar with functional programming, map is just a very simple way to iterate in an object using a function. So each object inside the product, in this case these three products, is going to call this function. This is a function definition here, and we are going to use the function to return the markup. So we have an array, and you have this map that is a functional way to iterate over an array. So you can have like the product here. So first this product is going to be cabbage, then it's going to be garlic, and then it's going to be apple. And this is going to be converted. That's why it's called map. You are mapping from X to UI. In this case, it's going to be this li here. So you are going to map from the product to a markup that represents the product. And then you can just have this list as a variable, and you can put here inside your markup. And I have a question to you. And why this is like lowercase? Why this is not uppercase if that's a React component? Or is this not a React component? Actually, this is just like we are holding a markup with React components inside. But you're not creating a component, like you are not providing props for this component. It's not a function, you know? You can think that you need to have the capital letter when you have a function. Then it's a component. Here is just a piece, a part of Markdown. It's not a component because it's not a function that receives props and return the markup. This is why here you can have lowercase, because this is not a component. And remember, a component you use using like a tag, not with braces. With braces just because this is a JavaScript variable. There is one important thing when you have like lists, because you need to have a key. This is important because if you manipulate this list later, React needs to reconcile like what are the chains and what should be the final DOM, the final HTML or the final tree. So that's important for React. All the time that you have iterations or lists or dynamic elements, you need to put a key there. And this key should be unique. If they're not unique, you're probably going to get a warning and maybe your app can misbehave. So it's important to have unique keys to put here. And usually this comes from your data and you know what is the best property to describe a unique key for your data from your domain. So let's see one example a little bit more complex. So we have a boolean here. So I have is fruit. And then you can also use some conditions to design a different UI. In this case, you are going to check if it's fruit, we are going to use the color magenta. And if it's not fruit, you're going to use the color dark green. So as you can see, apple is a fruit and apple is magenta here. So that's a very simple way, but it's powerful, as I said, because you can use just plain JavaScript code to customize your color here without like learning, oh, how should I do this in this specific library? Like in React, you can just do this as we always do. Like, and with style, this is just the same style that you have in the HTML. So every property that you have inside style in the HTML property, you can also use here. That's why color is working to change the color of this text. But maybe you're thinking, oh, but that's just like a lot of markups and a lot of definitions. What are the actions? So how the user can interact with my application? And that's called events. So in React, we have a lot of events that you can attach to tags. So you can have the property, like this case on-click property, and you can put a function, again, function. So when the user clicking this button, it's going to call this action, this function. And in this case, it's going to show an alert, say you click me. So it's a very simple way. You don't have like any fancy ways to handle events. It's just like another property. So you can put a property here, and for the default HTML attributes like form, buttons, links, you have every time a few properties that you can have that's going to bind these events with the events in the browser, in the HTML, in the DOM. So React does that for you, and in your case, it's going to be very simple functions like this. You can also get the original event and with all the data from HTML, but here, that's enough for now. And you can just try this, and you're going to see that you can fire events with very simple properties like this, for example, in a button. And our apps are usually not static, right? Something happen and then some data change, and then you need to affect the UI as well. Maybe it's an event from the user, maybe something that's coming from your server. So usually you call this as a state in React, and that's a very simple state that you have here in this example. You can have a count, and you can have like a way to set the count. And like we use this use state, that's called a hook. It's a special function that React is going to provide to us. And then you can put the initial data here. That's going to be 0. So this count initially is going to have the value of 0. And then it's a setter. It's a way to modify the state. So this is a little bit magicy, like if you don't get a full understanding of React yet. But like you just imagine that this is an array that you can deconstruct and give it names. So that's just JavaScript again. React takes a lot of advantage of JavaScript features. So you can deconstruct this array. We're using already these two first properties, the two first elements, and give you very specific names for this variable. So you are deconstructing this array. The first one is called count, and the second one is called set count. This is a variable, and this is a function. When you need to change something, you can just use this function here to set the value inside this variable. And React is going to handle like when it needs to render again and when it needs to update this data in the UI. So you could create like a handler, like an on-click handler like this, and you can change the data inside this count, providing a call to set count. Remember, this is just a name that you can put here. You can put any name and it's going to work the same. The important part is this is the variable that is holding the state, and this is a function that is changing the state. But you can name it the way that you want. Usually the first one is just the variable and the second one is set plus the variable name, but you can name it as you would like. If you put A here and B here, and it's going to work in the same way. They are just names. And then when the user click this button, this state is going to set from the previous state, that's the count, plus 1. So it's a simple counter that's going to increment 1 by 1 every time that you click. So we have this example here with 2 buttons. And the nice part about these buttons that you can see the state's not here in the app. The state is in the button itself. Can you see? It's the same component, but you have the state inside the button. And why this is important, you are going to see that when you click, we are just incrementing in one specific button. So React is not mixing the states. So each button has its own state, and that's really helpful. Imagine that you have a list with a lot of like pictures and or comments, and people are liking, commenting it. So React is going to put the state in the correct place, and it's not going to mix the state of one component with another component. So that gives you a very clear separation. React has a special function or a group of special functions that you can also create your own, but the functions, they are identified as special functions because they start with use. And we just saw like use state in the example above. So they are special because they have a certain rules to use. Like they needs to be in the top of the component. You can't return it before you run all the hooks in your component. You can't use this in a loop. So you have a few restrictions that you're going to learn along the way, but you just need to remember they are special and they have certain rules, but they are also really, really powerful. For example, they can hold state, as you just saw, and you can use it to also share data between components. Let's understand a little bit more about data and also hooks in React. Let's get our last example and let's improve it a little bit. Because in this example that you had, we are using like 2 buttons, okay? But as I showed you, you have different states. You have account here and you have account here. So when you click this button, just this count was affected. But let's suppose that you want to have a counter that is affected by both buttons. So in this case, what you are going to do, we need somehow to move the state from the button to my app. So that's really important in React because it's very common where you have one component that holds the state for multiple components that are below in the tree. That's called lift the state. So you get the state from here and you put the state one level up. So this is a very important concept. You are going to see this happening like many times in your application. So let's see how we could do in this specific case. So you can get the same code that was inside the My Button component and you can paste here. So we have in My App, can you see? It's not in the button anymore. And in the button, now we don't have that code anymore, but you need to have some code because we still need to show how many times this counter was incremented. But now we are going to share the same count for the 2 buttons, okay? The way that we do this, we pass down the values of these variables. So as I told you, these are just variables and you can provide they as properties for the component. So the same way that you provide the source for the image, you can also provide custom properties. And you can just put any name here and it's going to work and it's going to get to your component. So we are going to provide the count and the count property, and you are going to provide the handle click in the on click property. You could also call this handle click any name, but in the example they decide to call on click, and you are going to provide on click for our button here. Then now that we are inside our component, we need to get this count and also this on click because was the name that we provided here for the property. And then we are going to create the button using the on click. See, this on click is coming from above. It's coming from my app. And also the count is coming from above. It's coming from my app. I'm not declaring inside the button anymore. And this is why it's going to share the state. And as I said, this is called lifting state up. We are putting the state one level above so you can share. Maybe it's a little bit confusing because we are lifting the state so you can use the state below. But that's how it works, and you're going to see this working right now. So in this application here, you can see when I click here, it's going to increment both in the same time. Why? Because again, the count's here, the count's one level above, and then this count is being provided by to both components, to here and to here, and that's why both are affected in the same time. So when you click here, they are going to be affected in the same way. I will return to the illustration above just to make sure this is very, very clear. So in the first illustration, we had the state here inside the button. So when you click, this happened. Just this state was updated because you click just this button. Then in the second way that you create the code that you want to share the state, so we remove the state from here and you move to here, okay? So the state's now in the app. This is not the state, this is just a way that they draw the properties going down. Maybe it's a little bit confusing because it's the same drawing, but like this is the draw for the prop. So I'm getting the state here and I'm sending as a prop to my button. And then now when I click, doesn't matter if I click this one or this one because my handler is the same and my handler is updating this state here. I don't have state in my button anymore. So I'm going to pass this state down and that's why it's going to update here and to update here. So it's the same problem but with a different solution because in one case you want to have independent counts and in the other case you want to have like the same count for both buttons. That's why you need to lift the stage so you can share between these two buttons here. So let's wrap up with a recap here. So we learned how to create a component that is just a function that returns a markup. We learned that you can put components inside components, that's called nesting. We also learned that you can have styles and class names inside our markup. We learned that you can use braces to put data from JavaScript into our markups from React. We also learned that you can put conditions. You can use just if and else's, or you can use ternary operators, or you can use just conditions in JavaScript. And also you learn the lists. And in lists you have an important concept that you need to put a key, because these lists can change over time. Also you learned that you can put handlers to handle events, and that's the way that you make your app interactive for the users. You also update the screen, usually when you have a state. So you change the state and React is going to re-render the page for you. And we also learned that when you want to share data, you usually need to lift the state up so you can pass the props down with the new state, and multiple components can share the same state. So this was a very long video. I hope you enjoy, and I hope you learn like this quick start for React. But we are going to describe everything that you said here in a very fast way. We are going to describe in details, and you are going to learn how to think in terms of React in the next videos. I hope I see you in the next one. Bye bye.